In 1917, in a small town in Portugal, something happened that tens of thousands of people called a miracle. But what if it wasn't supernatural? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating scientific take that suggests everything that happened at Fatima could have been a stunningly complex technological show, and it's all based on the eyewitness accounts of the people who were actually there. This right here is the question that frames our entire investigation. Now, this isn't about disproving anyone's faith or belief, not at all. It's about asking a different question. Could every single thing that people saw and heard at Fatima be explained by the known laws of physics, just, wielded by a technology that is light years beyond our own? All right, so first, let's just quickly set the scene. We're in a field near Fatima, Portugal. 3 young shepherd children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, start reporting these incredible encounters that pretty soon the whole world is talking about. So this wasn't just some fleeting, one-time event. It was a series of meetings that happened over 6 whole months. Each time, the story grew, the anticipation built up, and it was all leading to a grand finale, a huge spectacle that the apparition itself had promised would happen on a very specific date. And this is the crucial part. As many as 70,000 people showed up on October 13th, standing in the pouring rain to see if the promise would be kept. Their testimony, all those different accounts, makes this one of the most well-documented paranormal events in history, giving us a ton of data to actually analyze. Okay, so let's get into the how. How could the absolute core of this mystery, the apparition of a lady that only the 3 children could see, have been created without any supernatural help? So was it just a mass hallucination? Well, the evidence seems to point away from that. The kids were really consistent, saying they were wide awake, totally conscious, not in some kind of trance. And here's the kicker. They described a physical, blinding light that was so bright they had to look away. That sounds a lot more like a real external light source, an optical projection, than some vision inside their minds. So the theory lands on an optical projection, which is, a pretty simple idea. It's basically just using light to put an image on a surface, kind of like a movie projector. But that simple idea immediately creates a huge problem. How do you project an image in the middle of a field with no walls and no screen? Right. You can't have a projection without something to project it onto. There were no buildings out there, no flat surfaces. There was just a little oak tree where this apparition supposedly appeared. So what was the screen? This is incredible. The answer comes directly from the other witnesses. Many people, not just the kids, talked about this weird little detail, a small, wispy cloud, almost like smoke or mist, that would just form over the tree right before the apparition appeared, and then it would just vanish when it was over. That cloud would have been the perfect temporary movie screen. Okay, but how on earth do you make a cloud appear on command? The hypothesis here is just fascinating. What if you aimed pulses of invisible infrared radiation at the tree? A tree is full of water, right? So if you heat it up really, really fast, that water would flash into vapor, creating a cloud. And this one idea explains 2 other weird things witnesses reported. A rumbling sound, which could be the noise of that rapid heating, and the fact that the tree's branches were later seen drooping, almost like they'd been flash-dried by some intense heat. And for the projector itself, the theory points to a laser. Because laser light is so incredibly focused, you can aim it with absolute precision over huge distances. We're talking hundreds, maybe even 1,000 kilometers. This suggests the projector might not have even been on Earth. It could have been on a craft in low Earth orbit. And think about it, that would perfectly explain another key detail: why the apparitions always happened around noon and were super brief. The orbital window to hit that one specific tree would have been tiny. So we have a theory for a silent projection, a silent movie basically, but this wasn't silent. At least 2 of the children said they had a whole conversation with the apparition, and that brings us to the mystery of the audio. This detail from Lucia's own testimony is just so specific and weird. The lady was speaking to them, but her lips weren't moving at all. That's a huge clue. It strongly suggests that the sound was being created and sent completely separately from the image. It's like instead of risking a bad lip sync, like in a dubbed movie, they just used a totally different channel for the sound. So how could you possibly have a 2-way conversation? I mean, this is where it gets wild. To get sound to the children, A modulated light beam, think of it like audio encoded into light, could have been aimed right at their heads. This would cause tiny vibrations in their skulls that the inner ear hears as sound. It's a real thing called bone conduction, and because it's so tightly focused, it could explain why Francisco saw the image but heard nothing. And to hear Lucia's questions, a laser microphone, which is actual spy tech, could have read the tiny vibrations her voice made on the leaves of the tree, instantly sending her words back to the source. And now we get to the grand finale, the main event on October 13th, the thing that 70,000 people stood in the rain to see, the so-called miracle of the sun. The miracle can really be broken down into a series of different events, and each one has a plausible technological explanation. That dancing silver disk in the sky, that could be a laser projected onto a much bigger artificial cloud, with the dancing just being atmospheric distortion, kind of like how stars twinkle. The rainbow colors shooting off it, well, that could be what happens when multiple colored laser beams don't line up perfectly. And everybody's soaking wet clothes suddenly being dry, that points right back to that infrared radiation used to make the cloud, which would have also warmed up the ground and the entire crowd. And this is maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. The witnesses were not looking at the actual sun. They couldn't have been. They were looking at a very powerful light show projected onto a screen of man-made clouds. And that cloud screen was just thick enough to block out the real sun, which is the only reason tens of thousands of people could stare at this dancing sun for minutes on end without being permanently blinded. When you piece all this together, the cloud screen, the projection, the two-way audio, it all points to an incredibly complex, deliberately staged event. Which, of course, leads us to the ultimate question. If this was all planned, who had the motive, and who on earth had the technology to pull it off? You know, what really makes Fatima stand out from so many other UFO stories or weird events is that this wasn't random. The finale was announced months ahead of time, right down to the day and the hour. That implies a level of intelligent control and deliberate planning that is just mind-boggling. So, who could do this? The analysis suggests we shouldn't be thinking about a civilization that's just a few hundred or even a few thousand years ahead of us. It suggests we should consider the possibility of a civilization that is millions or maybe even a billion years old. A civilization so ancient that their technology would look like magic, or even like the work of a god. In the end, this whole scientific breakdown of Fatima doesn't really give us a final answer. It doesn't tell us who was behind the curtain. Instead, it leaves us with this much more powerful question, one that echoes Arthur C. Clarke's famous law. It really challenges us to think about the limits of our own understanding and to wonder, what happens when we finally encounter a technology so advanced that to our eyes, it can only be a miracle?